Children's TV. Now, it used to be sort of an innocent place to put your kids in front of the TV, not have to worry that they were going to imbibe trans ideology or vax for children propaganda. Well, no longer, because the left has discovered that it really, really likes indoctrinating kids and whatever the preferred policies of the day are.
These aren't really environmentally, just punches her off frame.
We're all disgusting.
We are all degenerates.
I think Disney is digging its own grave with this woke nonsense. They seem to be on a better path in the last year. They replaced their CEO and had been quiet on political matters, but there's a rot inside this company with leftists in position of power.
The show is shoving these inane pronouns down the throats of 7-year-olds.
If you extract the spiritual aspect of this movie just on the basis of the content of being about, you know, menstruation and this coming of age, it's not appropriate for children.
No longer the Joker, now he's the woker.
Scooby-Doo? More like Scooby-Don't.
It's a children's show. Got that, Bobby? America is a very bad place, and it's your fault. Your fault.
Stop making cartoons political. That's been a common talking point in a lot of right-leaning circles for around the past decade or so. Depending on who you asked, what's being considered political will vary. Sometimes people are referring to the inclusion of certain subjects like discrimination and human rights, and other times you have people just mad that a character other than a traditional white straight male exists within the piece of media being talked about. Regardless of which subject of scrutiny is being referred to within the context of conversation, I'm here to tell you that cartoons have always been political. To say that they haven't been is just an entirely false claim that ignores the very history and origin of cartoons. If someone says that they wish they made cartoons how they used to, it really just shows that they have no idea what they're talking about. And in the very worst case scenario, do know what they're talking about and are hiding behind that statement as an overly long and complicated way of avoiding explaining why they don't like something in its subject material, or just not being weird and simply stating that they don't like something. Even the cartoons that people commonly refer to as the ones made in the good old days and often are viewed as apolitical by those making this argument, like the Looney Tunes, had very blatant political messaging. But more on that later. First, we need to take a quick crash course on the history of cartoons, which I implore you to do further research on since I'll be simplifying it here. While the first ever animated cartoon is considered to be Emily Cole's Phantasmagorie, released in 1908, cartoons by definition got their start much earlier. The use of cartoon to mean a humorous drawing began back in the 1800s. Specifically in 1843, when Punch magazine used the term to describe the satirical drawings that can be found in its contents. In the specific instance of Punch magazine, they often featured works by John Leech, who combined verbal and graphic political satire in the form of illustrations known as cartoons. Some of the first were meant to parody the events in the then new Palace of Westminster. Other cartoonists of note during this time were Mel Kalman, Bill Hallman, and Peter Arno, to name a few. In 1877, cartoons were used to report on the Civil War. One of the most important cartoonists of this time was Thomas Nast, who was part of the staff at Harper's Weekly. Nast was known for his work being allegorical and emblematic, rather than relying on realism like many other cartoonists of the time did. Nast satirized the major political issues of his era, such as slavery, the Civil War, Reconstruction, and political corruption. Nast was also credited for helping to jail William Tweed by bringing publicity to his criminal activities through his publications. Cartoons during this time were incredibly important to that of the Civil War because they were designed as tools of partisan persuasion, using humor to foster ridicule, admiration, fear, and anger. Because of his work and overall impact, Nast is considered to be the father of the American cartoon. He even popularized the use of a donkey for the symbol of the Democratic Party and Uncle Sam. In 1900, newspaper cartoonist J. Stuart Blackton and Winsor McCay began making animated short films by filming a series of drawings and projecting them. Blackton originally worked as a reporter and illustrator for the New York Evening World, which led to him interviewing Thomas Edison, the conversation that occurred being what jump-started his obsession with filmmaking. Blackton released the Enchanted Drawing in 1900, and because of this action is considered to be the father of American animation. In 1906, he later released Humorous Phases of Funny Faces, which was the first animated cartoon in the United States. Not much later in the year 1923 is when Walt Disney came onto the scene and began by adapting children's stories into short animated cartoons. More on Walt later, as he is incredibly important for obvious reasons. 4 years later, in 1927, Theodore Seuss Geisel, otherwise known as Dr. Seuss, also enters the scene by selling cartoons to magazines. Despite mainly being known for his children's books in the modern day, Dr. Seuss's work was also incredibly political. He actually started out as a political cartoonist, drawing cartoons for the Dartmouth Jack-o'-lantern, which was Dartmouth College's humor magazine at the time. His political commentary didn't stop there, however, and his opinions bled into that of his illustrated children's books. Some of the most notable cartoons that contain political commentary would be The Lorax, The Cat in the Hat, and Horton Hears a Who. His messaging often included anti-fascist and anti-racist themes, though it's important to note that they also commonly utilized racial stereotypes when depicting non-white individuals. Although his contribution to the medium is notable in the context regarding the history of cartoons, I felt that this needed to be acknowledged. On November 18th of 1928, Mickey Mouse was introduced and featured in the first ever animated sound cartoon, the short film Steamboat Willie. Disney continued to make history by releasing The Skeleton Dance on August 22nd, 1929, and introduced Donald Duck on June 9th, 1934 in The Wise Little Hen. On December 21st, 1937, Walt Disney Productions released the first ever feature-length cel-animated film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Like Dr. Seuss, however, White also dabbled in political commentary and considered himself to be a patriot. Because of Walt Disney Studios' reputation for making the movies Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, Pinocchio, Fantasia, and Dumbo, they had made quite a name for themselves by this time. With the familiarity the American people had with Disney, it was viewed as advantageous for the government to use their fame to aid in the American war effort. Walt Disney signed a contract with the US Navy, which required Disney to produce 20 short cartoons about the war for the US government for $90,000. That equates to more than $1 million in 2023. These films were produced between 1941 and 1945 during World War II. In 1941, Walt Disney formed the Walt Disney Training Films Unit to produce military training films for the government. This unit was responsible for producing pro-American war propaganda to increase support for the war. They made films for the Navy, the Treasury Department, and the Army Air Force. Per the request of the US government, Disney also produced films that were anti-German as well as anti-Japanese. One such example of Disney's pro-war propaganda was the short Der Fuhrer's Face in 1943, an indictment of fascism starring Donald Duck, who at the time was Disney's most popular character. In general, Hollywood's main goal during this period of time was to boost morale in America. This was a direct result of the attack on Pearl Harbor, as before there were few anti-Nazi films being produced in fear of offending foreign audiences. Like Dr. Seuss, however, Disney was not immune to also utilizing the stereotypical and racist imagery of that time period. Fear-mongering and distortion were key elements of propagandists' toolkit. Notably, Warner Brothers also released a series of political cartoons centered around World War II, utilizing the Looney Tunes cast between the years of 1943 and 1945. One of the most notable out of these cartoons would be anti-Nazi cartoon Hair Meets Hair, starring Bugs Bunny, which was released in 1945. A few other examples of their World War II cartoons are Drafty Daffy, Little Red Riding Rabbit, and Russian Rhapsody. How the government used the media to their advantage is quite an interesting and important thing to read up on, so I will leave my sources for both Disney's World War II propaganda and the other historical figures discussed earlier in the description. In 1948, John Sutherland Productions released Make Mine Freedom, which was an animated anti-communist propaganda cartoon made for the Extension Department of Harding College, now known as Harding University. Famous pair William Hanna and Joseph Barbera worked with Sutherland on this film, and then went on in 1957 to found Hanna-Barbera Productions. One notable cartoon that came as a product from the studio was The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle and Friends, commonly referred to as simply Rocky and Bullwinkle, which originally aired between 1959 and 1964. The show followed the misadventures of the two main characters, Rocky the Flying Squirrel and Bullwinkle the Moose. The antagonists of the show were Boris and Natasha, Russian-accented spies who often fell on their own grenades. It was no coincidence that the two spies were Russian, as during this time, the height of the Cold War was happening. The cartoon was a parody of sorts between the space and arms race of the US and the Soviets, whilst also commentating on the American government and military. Rocky and Bullwinkle appealed to both children and adults, and is still held within high esteem. Other notable examples of older cartoons that contain political subjects would be The Simpsons, which first aired on December 17th, 1989, and South Park, which first aired August 13th, 1997. There's hundreds upon hundreds of examples of older cartoons containing politics and serious subjects, but this was simply a brief history of the most notable to prove a point. Politics is what inspired cartoons and has always existed in cartoons, and they always will. Now we're finally onto the topic that first pushed me to make this video, the claim that modern cartoons need to stop including political commentary and discussing serious subjects, and need to return to what they used to be. Since it seems we're at the height of the culture war movement, I'm honestly starting to lose my patience with political pundits. As you saw in the bulk of this video, politics are ingrained within the very fabric and history of cartoons. For better or for worse, we would not have cartoons without political commentary. That's just a fact, whether or not those making the argument want to acknowledge it. Even moving past historical context, cartoons are made by humans. Humans make art based off of their lived experiences, and others' lived experiences. That's why human-made art has meaning, and is able to resonate with other humans and cause emotion. Human beings are affected by politics. Their experiences are affected by politics. Humans experience discrimination, sexism, racism, ableism, and abuse, which end up shaping their lives. Children are humans. Children are affected by politics. Children understand cartoons that cover serious subjects because they experience serious life events. You get the point. Some of America's most popular pieces of media have very strong political undertones. Hell, it's not even animated, but even with Star Wars. It's in the title that it's political with the word wars. In terms of talking exclusively of popular older cartoons, Avatar: The Last Airbender covers sexism, genocide, fascism, and ableism. The Rugrats touches upon themes of feminism and death of a parent. As Told by Ginger has an episode about addiction. The Powerpuff Girls as a whole is very feminist. Hey Arnold even has an episode about reuniting a non-white family separated by the Vietnam War. Ed, Edd n Eddy covers familial abuse on multiple occasions. My Life as a Teenage Robot is about coming of age and puberty while feeling like an outcast. And honestly, I'd argue that there's deeper messaging in a vast majority of cartoons from the early 2000s and earlier that most people don't immediately pick up on. Again, human beings are the ones who make cartoons. Fictional conflict is derived from personal and historical conflict. You could not have the plot of Avatar without drawing from real-life examples and experiences of oppression. Just because children have become the primary audience for modern cartoons does not mean that they cannot understand these subjects. To say so would be silly because being under the age of 18 doesn't make you magically disqualified from feeling the effects of political decisions and bigotry. Age doesn't stop people from experiencing their first period, discovering their sexuality, or suffering verbal and physical abuse from a family member. These things are not exclusive to adulthood. It's just insane to me that movies like Turning Red are considered to be woke just because it mentions menstruation and shows period products on screen. As if the average age for someone to start their period isn't 12, and as if it can't start as young as 8. But no, we must protect the children by making them feel ashamed about normal bodily functions. Look, I'm just tired of this nonsense. It's not political to include non-white characters in your cartoon. It's not political to have female characters in your cartoon that aren't just side character romantic interests. It's not political to showcase other cultures in cartoons. It's not political to have LGBT+ characters. If you think these things are political, please reflect and ask yourself why that is and whether or not you're the one who's making it political. As far as covering all of the serious subjects go. 1. Reproductive health and the inclusion of talking about related subjects is needed and not a new thing. In 1947, Disney even made a cartoon short called The Story of Menstruation. It's important for children to know about periods because it is a bodily function that half of the population has to deal with. Please explain to me how education and normalizing something that is very much a part of the human experience is wrong. Just because something makes you uncomfortable does not inherently mean that it's immoral. As someone who personally was never taught what a period was and then years later thought I was dying when I first got it, I wish that cartoons talked about it more. Maybe then my relationship with my body wouldn't have been so negative. Number 2, talking about LGBT+ people and rights is also not inappropriate for younger viewers. Some kids have LGBT+ parents, siblings, or other family members. It helps to normalize so that they don't feel left out. It's also possible that the child may be experiencing their own identity issues, and fictional instances of discovering oneself can be helpful. TLDR, LGBT+ people exist and are not the ones who made their existence political. 3. Cartoons covering subjects such as abuse. Children deal with abuse. That's just the straight up ugly and unfortunate truth. Stories involving such subjects may make them realize what's happening and enable them to reach out to a family member or trusted adult for help. Obviously, I agree that these subjects need to be dealt with carefully and methodically, but I feel them not being allowed to exist without being dismissed as part of the woke mind virus or whatever is doing more harm than good. 4. Cartoons covering bigotry. Again, just like with the other things, children experience bigotry. Kids who aren't white experience racism. Kids who are not straight or cisgender experience homophobia and transphobia. Kids who are disabled experience ableism. These are not subjects that they're unfamiliar with because they live with it. So I'm not sure why people feel the need for it to be excluded from cartoons to protect those who are fortunate enough not to deal with these things. You would think that children learning not to be bigots and discriminate would be considered a good thing. Well-taught children developed into well-adjusted adults that don't commit hate crimes and spread hate. But maybe that's not what the no politics in cartoons crowd wants. 5. As far as cartoons aimed at adults covering all of the subjects above, I understand even less what the issue is. Like, we as adults have definitely experienced all of those issues, or in terms of political commentary in cartoons, we're literally experiencing it right now or have studied it in school. I understand the need for escapism with how shitty the world is right now, but like, at a certain point, if you don't like what a show's topic is about, maybe just don't watch it. I don't know, just a thought. Just because you personally don't like what's being covered doesn't mean that it doesn't have the right to exist. It's just dumb. It's a dumb argument. There are plenty of slapstick no-story cartoons that exist, and the existence of another cartoon that you don't like or get anything out of isn't taking away from that. Just remember that you can't cherry-pick with the whole no politics in my cartoons thing. It can't just be subjects that you agree with or like, you better damn well be consistent, because otherwise, we know that you're just using it as a scapegoat for something far more nefarious. If today's children are forced to deal with the existential threat of gun violence, their weird uncle on Thanksgiving spouting conspiracy theories, and being told that their feelings and opinions don't matter, they can handle the things listed above and more. If anything, it's far healthier than the things that I just mentioned and requires critical thinking, something that today's youth desperately needs to learn. Of course, what I'm talking about as a whole doesn't exclude criticism. Some cartoons miss their mark and come across as fan service or may have harmful stereotypes depicted. Obviously, this isn't what the whole video is about. Good faith criticism is incredibly important to any job or medium because nothing is perfect. The only way that we improve is by getting the perspective of others. Simply saying, I don't like this show because it has pronouns in it, isn't criticism though. That's just stupidity combined with not understanding the English language. Saying that you don't like how something was handled and why, while giving examples of how it was harmful or how to do better is though. Ultimately, if you're a parent, you should always do research on what your child is watching or even just watch it with them. It'd be a good bonding activity and you should show interest in what your child likes. If you want to educate them yourself without shows or internet content influencing them, that's your right and your decision up until they're 18. But it isn't your right or decision to make the choice for everyone on whether or not the content including those subjects exists. Really, the conclusion of this video is just that I'm annoyed. Like, that's basically it. Cartoons have always been political just as an irrefutable historical fact. They literally started off as political satire. The cartoons that people say they want back are also political or carry political themes. Rewatch Avatar and tell me that that show doesn't deal with topics or characters that would be labeled as woke today. I dare you. Signed, a miserable, childless cat lady.